Welcome back to Wages and Employment at Wilfrid Laurier University. Today we're going to look at some extensions and applications of our basic labor supply model with some real-world problems in mind. For reference, you should pair this video with readings in Chapter 2 of your textbook. So when we think about the basic labor supply model we've constructed in this chapter, we need to pause and think about how easily we can use it to talk about our real world problems. One of the most obvious things to point out is that most people don't have a lot of choice in how many hours to work. Standard jobs offer full-time hours, say 37.5 hours per week, or nothing at all. It would be very difficult for me to negotiate a 12-hour work week with my employer, for example. But there is some flexibility in that I could take on a second job. Some people can work overtime hours at a premium, or I could take on some self-employment to boost my income. But there's also other things to consider. We have to negotiate with our families about how we spend our time. We might rely on our families as a source of insurance and supporting us during any times of unemployment. What we're going to do in this section is fit those real-life complications into our very basic model. One of the great reasons to have a family is that a good family acts as a form of insurance. When times are tough, there's other people there to help you out. So when a person loses their job, we might expect other family members to step up, find some extra work, and supplement the family income. This response is known as the added worker effect. Given traditional roles of women, labor economists have studied this behavior among married women, but there's good reason to think of this more broadly today. We can think of this in terms of our labor supply model. Here we have a married person whose spouse has an income, which to him is non-labor income YN1. In that context, the person chooses leisure at L1. Now suppose the spouse loses some of their work, shifts to part-time, for instance. From this worker's point of view, this is a drop in their non-labor income, and their potential income constraint drops. With a pure income effect, this person will purchase less leisure time, moving to L2 and working more hours. I'll note that this was the case of someone who was already working. For someone who wasn't participating, this drop in non-labor income could have pushed them into the labor force. Now, why would we find this interesting? Within some groups in the population, we actually see an increase in labor supply during recessions, despite and because of the layoffs around them. These dynamics in a family make movements in the labor market much more interesting to study. Another problem we run into, especially in recessions, is known as hidden unemployment. To be considered unemployed, a person has to be available and searching for work. A big concern here is for a group of workers who would like jobs but don't believe any are available, and so they aren't searching. This is most common in a recession when people are seeing layoffs all around them. We could think of discouraged workers as people having a high reservation wage, keeping them out of the labor force in our model. But in the short run, where the market doesn't adjust quickly, I think it's fair to say it's more complicated than that. Another group to be concerned with are the people with limited availability. A good example is parents of young children. They might want to work and to be searching for work, but deemed unavailable unless they already have kids in some sort of childcare. Most generally, we're concerned here with a group that is marginally attached to the labor force. They don't meet normal definitions of unemployment, but they don't look like your standard non-participants like retirees either. We note them here because they tend to get a lot of policy attention. Now, let's return to the very practical problem that most job offers don't come with a lot of flexibility. You might recall this from figure 2.6 of our textbook. We considered what a potential income constraint looks like when we have these three options. We can work full-time hours with point C, part-time hours at B, or not at all at point A. That seems a fairly realistic way of looking at our market. So we'll take a closer look at this and see how people might manage this. Here, with figure 2.12 of your text, we simplify it a bit so a person really has the choice between working a job that offers T minus LC hours of work or no hours at all. And to keep the diagram simpler, there's no non-labor income here. So non-participation is not an attractive option, as you'd starve to death in this case. So we'll focus on this option here at point C. Now this person would like to choose leisure time at point D. but that's just not an option for them. So the person is left with choosing the bundle at point C because that is the best that they can do. This is a person we would call underemployed because they'd be happier working more hours if the market offered that kind of flexibility. So what do? Often people will find a second job. Now, back in the 1980s, we called this moonlighting. I'm told you might think of this as a side hustle. Whatever you want to call it, I'm thinking of a second job that probably offers a lower rate of pay than your main job, but it offers some flexibility in hours. We bring that into our model here by altering our potential income constraint. The point C is still an option, but to the right of that, we add this segment I've colored blue, representing a new set of options at a lower wage rate. So it has that flatter slope. And we line that up with the highest indifference curve possible, ending up at this point B here. So they're going to work a first set of hours at their main job, and then a second set at the side hustle. They're better off than when they only had their main job, but worse off than if they had more flexibility in that main job to choose a different set of hours. Now consider a person who has a similar job with fixed hours, leading to point C as their choice for work and consumption. They are worse off than if they had more flexibility, preferring point D with more leisure time. So we would say that they are overemployed. How might their employer manage to convince them to work a few more hours when they need them? That won't happen at the existing wage rate, and it's certainly not good practice to threaten them. So this employer could offer a higher wage rate for the extra hours. That adds in this new segment to the worker's potential income constraint. I put in purple here. And in this case, the person is willing to work a bit more. Basically, this is why many employers will offer an overtime premium even if the law does not require it. Now, could the employer have offered a higher wage rate for all hours and achieved the same objective? That is, the higher hours observed at point O here in our diagram. Offering the straight time equivalent, as shown with this orange segment of the constraint, would give the person the same total income for that choice of hours, but at a higher wage rate for each and every hour. With that option, and supposing they had some flexibility, this person would have worked less than what we would see with the overtime premium. So the one thing I hope you gain from this section is to see that there are huge gains to be made when work schedules have some flexibility. But why would employers want to keep the fixed hours? In some businesses, there are costs that can be saved when workers' schedules are predictable. But we can also show that some workers would be willing to take a bit of a wage cut to gain that flexibility, perhaps moving from C, where the person is overemployed at a higher wage rate, to F, where they're working a bit less, but they're just as well off. And that wraps up our main points for the second chapter in this course. Next time, we will be looking at income maintenance programs in chapter 3.